Welcome to the Solution Architect Show. The podcast is for IT professionals who want to transition into solution architect and also who want to become an exceptional good solution architect and also build a rewarding and lifelong career in IT. Today, I'm super excited. I'm joined by Adrian, an experienced solution architect and architecture consultant with over 25 years experience in IT industry. Adrian has helped deliver architecture and integration solution across government and enterprise organizations in New Zealand and overseas. Throughout his career, he's led major transformation programs, mentored architects, and helped build high-performing consulting teams. Today, we'll explore his career journey, lesson learned in solution architecture and his career, and also advice for aspiring architect. Welcome to the show, Adrian.
Hello, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Cool. For any guest come to my show, I always try to start from the beginning. So my first question would be, how actually did you begin your career in IT?
My career in IT started with HTML, funnily enough, just getting books out from the library with titles like HTML in 24 hours and stuff like that, which my wife thought was quite hilarious. My background before that was actually in theatre lighting. And when I say that to people, they often go, it's nothing to do with IT, like how would you make the transition? But actually, there's lots of transferable skills. You're working to deadlines, you're dealing with people, working to pressure, fault finding, and technical systems. They're not digital, but you're still fault finding. Anyway, so I came back to New Zealand from Australia, and the lighting company I worked for needed a website. So I said, I can do that. And because I was already interested in learning some programming. And by programming at that stage, it was just HTML. So it's not really programming as most people understand it. And really just went from there. So just read library books and just played around with Notepad and a browser. So not even any Flash tools, and just picked up the basics and went from there. And then one thing led to another, and I managed to score a role with a web development company. And just went from there.
This was really an interesting journey. I didn't pick that one up from your LinkedIn profile. I think your LinkedIn profile started as almost a senior developer, I think. You must have a long time, 25 years. You probably wouldn't put everything in there. Coming back to your career, right? So you mentioned you started learning HTML and become a web developer. What is your pathway into solution architect?
I think one of the things that's important for anyone in their career is to find things that you're good at and that you enjoy doing. And if you look just at architecture, there's various types of architecture that you can do, and there's various different types of problem that you can solve. So I really enjoy solution architecture because it's high enough up the food chain where you're solving some quite interesting problems, but it's not so far up that you're removed from reality. I don't think I could do enterprise architecture, for example. I think that's just a little bit too abstract for me. That doesn't mean that it's not a valuable professional skill. It's just not the kind of problem that I enjoy solving. And I think that when I was coding, I love to code. There's something quite therapeutic about coding, and I still code for fun and occasionally do proof of concepts for work. And I think I always enjoyed the design aspect of software development and getting a problem from scratch and trying to figure out what the appropriate solution might be. So I guess maybe my appetite for problem solving just went from beyond a particular small problem that you're given to code against, to looking more broadly, well, what does the entire solution need? And I wouldn't describe myself as an extrovert, but I seem to still quite enjoy working with people and working with people from the business or people that aren't have a technical background and trying to explain to them what they needed to know to figure out what the solution needed to be. I found that quite enjoyable. So I guess I just naturally rose up doing design on top of the development and enjoying that. And I just found myself in a space where I just landed on solution architecture, and I've just been there ever since.
Cool. You mentioned about enterprise architectures. About 18 months of full-time enterprise architect, I got roughly the same feeling. When I work as a solution architect, right? You got your next role could be a enterprise architect if you want to move up. But when I actually get that role, I actually realized it's more a super BA than super solution architect, because it's more of a business role. You really need to understand the business and let it from a capability perspective in exact angle. I always say business analyst doing the process mapping from a customer lens, like how customer engage with company and how that process work and how you're going to optimize and automate that process. But then enterprise architect, look at it from exact lines. Like when you say transformation, like you look at capability and you assess the capability in terms of maturity, and then you can see, okay, in order to have a customer centric, and you normally start with your customer related capability, and you do some like maturity mapping and see how you're going to transform that area. Well, definitely different. I agree with you. I still love tech, especially solution architect give you that where you can actually work on solving the problem in the digital space. I think we had a chat before the podcast how I define solution architect as a professional problem solver. It just you happen solving
Exactly.
problem in the digital space.
Oh, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
There was something I was just going to say on that. Oh, just possibly escaped me. Oh, that's right. The other thing, I guess, about which role you end up in and how you approach it probably comes from your background and how you get there. So for my particular journey, coming up through development circles as a developer, particularly when I was a junior, I'd often have experiences where I'd be working with more senior developers. Developers were genuinely very good and very experienced and could easily have been architects in themselves. And I think we had a few sort of dodgy experiences with a few, and the developers were quite critical of them. And I got a fairly strong feeling early on of what an effective architect looks like. And I told myself, I never want to be like that. If I want to make sure that if I become an architect, I want to make sure that what I'm doing is valued by the developers. And I think if you're a solution architect, when you're working with development teams, because you're staying close to delivery, it's easier to stay in touch with the coalface, as it were. And you see more directly how your guidance helps them, or perhaps where we got gaps. Whereas I think as an enterprise architect, you're just further removed. So yeah, for me, I try to really keep it front of mind, making sure that whatever I'm doing is of practical value.
Yeah. I'm keen to understand. You mentioned you've seen other developer being critical of a certain architect, and you can see the ineffective of a solution architect. How do you define, or what is your observation in the area, like when seeing an architect that didn't do their job properly in a way? Yeah.
It comes back to what the role's all about, I reckon. For me, and I guess the idea of the podcast is to give guidance for people coming into solution architecture, right? So
Yeah.
one of the golden rules is understanding what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Because unless you understand what the problem is you're trying to solve, then putting the cart before the horse. And so often you will see this with people, with architects coming in with a preconceived idea of what they think the solution should be. So maybe they have a particular technology stack in mind. It might be something that they are familiar with in the past, and so that might be all they know. That might be where their confidence lies, where they feel more comfortable, or they might have maybe it would be the day, wouldn't it? Maybe they want to insert AI into the solution somewhere because they're desperate to use it. And that idea of putting the technology first and the problem second, I think that's a recipe for disaster. And so I think a lot of the times when you see an architect going down the wrong path, that's sometimes an issue. They're putting the technology first. Yeah.
Yeah, moving on. I think we all agree that we're in a very fast changing industry. How do you actually stay current and developing your skills in your role today and prepare sort of yourself for the coming?
Yeah, it's a very topical question, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So actually thinking about that today, I think there's different planes, if you like, of knowledge that are relevant to being a solution architect. It's a little bit like how air moves across this is going to sound really esoteric. I'm going to sound like an enterprise architect here. This is going to sound ivory tower. It's a little bit like how air moves around the planet. The higher you go up into the altitude, the faster air moves. When you go up at the height of where airplanes fly, it goes many hundreds of kilometers an hour, but close to the ground, wind tends to be much slower. And so there's these three strata of knowledge and things that you need to understand as an architect to stay current. So the strata is the most slow moving, and that would be stuff like people skills, communication skills, soft skills, stuff like that. So I find that any investment that you put into understanding soft skills, those learnings will you back forever. Any investment of your time into those will keep paying you back over the long period. And then the next strata on top of that is technical skills. So not technology skills, but technical skills. So technical skills, how to do the art and the craft of solution architecture. So for example, understanding how to define an architecture well, understanding design patterns and principles, how to do options analysis, that kind of thing. There's technical skills behind our craft that you always be learning. And the movement in that sort of space in terms of staying current, that doesn't move very fast either. I think it moves perhaps a bit faster than people skills, because there's always research going on in both of those areas. But it's certainly not hard If you pay attention to, say, the odd architecting newsletter or podcasts like this, there's always new ideas coming out about our craft that you can pick up and blend into your own toolbox. And so that's a slightly greater rate of change, but it's not that great a rate of change. And then the final lane at the top, which is the most fast moving, is of course the technology. And so the that I've taken for my career is I'm very much about understanding what the problem is first and then looking for solutions that fit the problem. And so that will likewise would go to the technology. I'll be looking for the right technology once I understand what the problem is. Any architect that's been in the game for any length of time will probably understand that 9 times out of 10, when you're taking on a new engagement or a new project, there's going to be constraints in place. Like you really have a completely green field. So there's always constraints that you need to work within, like existing technology choices and so you work with those. And so by adopting that approach of understanding the problem first and trying to be technology agnostic, I'm deliberately trying to keep myself at arm's length from the technology changes and having to keep up with those. The flip side would be is, say, you might pick a technology horse, as it were. So, for example, you might work in a consulting firm that dealt with Salesforce. And so therefore you might find yourself on this treadmill of having to constantly keep up to spec with your Salesforce accreditation. The same for AWS or GCP or Microsoft Azure. Particularly, I'm not too familiar with GCP and AWS in terms of their accreditation. I'm sure they have some, but certainly Microsoft has a lot. There are different types of accreditation you can get. And so I have this concern that if I get on that treadmill, then it's going to be hard to get off because I'm always going to feel obliged to stay up to date with my training. And so you put yourself in that treadmill, so to speak. And of course, the rise of AI and stuff like that, there's always new technology coming out. And it's very hard to keep on top of it all. So the approach is to just try and disengage from that. And you definitely go into it when you need to, but try not to get caught up in it if possible.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree on that. I guess, in fact, that one of the major factor for me to pivot from a senior developer into a solution architect is I took a bet on a technology called SharePoint. As you all know, like SharePoint as a platform do survive, but SharePoint as a development platform doesn't. So over the years, you've seen like we to almost learn that we have around doing customization for SharePoint doesn't require anymore. Like we have to move on to pick up a new technology. Enough, I actually take a bet on Salesforce, but then I did ask some of my like a senior manager I trust to say, hey, you guys seem to having a really happy or long career in IT. I'm told by a lot of people when I study IT in university, it's only for young people and you have to relearn a lot of the skills over time. I said, you guys seem to be reasonably happy and don't see you actually pursuing like certification every year to renew your certification all the time. And they basically mentioned it's about soft skills. And as you mentioned, Adrian, and the leadership. And the set that doesn't change often, which is they mentioned about this sort of the runway for you to learn. Like if you look at some of the soft skills books, how to win friends, influence people, and some of the communication book and emotional intelligence books along that line, they're almost like 80 or 90 years old. Like the book has just keep having the newer edition where we got like a set of SharePoint or Java or .NET books that barely last for 6 months. And then you almost have to throw them away and get a new one. So that just indicate the lifetime for technical skills is becoming very short. When you move up, you don't really need to becoming that specialized. You mentioned you just need to really understand the business problem and then apply the architectural sort of technical skills around in order to say how you actually define the problem and come up with solution, and also how you facilitate that decision making, like essentially comparing the options and try to make the best sort of decision at a time, given all the information you have.
Yeah, just also the flip side to that is if someone was listening to this, they might be thinking, there's no point me doing all that study or going into that technology now because it'll be a waste of time. You could think about it as being a waste of time in the long run, and that knowledge might only have a finite period which it'll be useful and then it won't be useful. But you need to go through that. If I think of all the development that I did, I learned classic ASP. I haven't done classic ASP in years, but you learn so much going through the process. And there's a lot of things that different technologies have in common despite the product-specific features. And so having gone through a journey of learning a technology and being able to apply it, there's still so much transferable skill from that you can take with you, even if the specifics of the product get left behind. And gone through that journey, it gives you a real world technical credibility that you will need. Because the moment you're going to go and talk to engineers and developers and you need to try and convince them to your point of view, you need to meet them where they are. You need to be able to speak their language. And personally, I find it really helpful to empathize with people and understand the problems that I know that they'll be going through because I've gone through them myself. The language that I might have used at the time might be long gone, but there's still learnings that you can take from it in the long term.
Yeah. I'm also curious, you seem to be quite good at this communication and the soft skills. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just asking, when you did this transition from a developer to architect, or even back in the days when you are transitioning to IT, are there any sort of challenges that you face, and how do you actually overcome those challenges?
There's two parts. One is the skills in general, and then just more particularly some of the problems around getting into the solution architecture. I can probably cover that off quite quickly. So one of the things about solution architecture when I started, which I think is still an issue now, but maybe less so, I don't know, I'd be interested to know what you think about this, is that the role isn't very well defined, and that generally speaking, people in IT more broadly don't have a consistent view of what architecture is, let alone solution architecture specifically. So on the one hand, that's an advantage and a disadvantage. It's an advantage where if you're able to use that ambiguity in your favor, then it allows you to do stuff which can be quite good. But it's also a problem in that if you're a junior architect and you're still trying to find your feet, it's probably easier for people to take advantage of that and railroad you into doing stuff which, strictly speaking, as an architect, maybe you shouldn't do, or they can take advantage of your ignorance, but not necessarily intentionally. It's just more that they don't really understand what an architect is, and because you're a junior, they might perhaps not listen to you as much. So I had a couple of problems with that, nothing too major. I had one problem with one project manager in particular where they had quite a strong view of something that needed to happen and bits and pieces. And because of my relative junior ranking, that was a bit of an issue. And I think the ambiguity of solution architecture maybe played a part in that, but that's what it was. More generally, so your question was about soft skills and overcoming problems.
I can give you my view
Please.
while you're thinking about it. So I totally agree. So I developed some sort of a way of articulating that is not completely, but first is depending on what type of company you work for. So if you are working in a consulting firm, a lot of solution architects are part of the sales. So they essentially try to sell their services or solution. And it's similar with a big tech. If you work for Microsoft or Salesforce, if you're not in their core product team, you are in their professional services team, you are part of the sales. When you actually work in a corporate environment, where I define that, where IT is, you're not selling IT services, you're selling some other things like maybe banking or insurance, or maybe if you're in government sector, you provide some services. And architects in those environments are quite compliance driven. So you normally have an architecture review process. Project has to go through that process and they can progress to the next stage or next phase of the project. So it will be quite like a document, like you have to produce a design based on the template, and then there's a discussion, and you have to really fulfilling a lot of the compliance governance process. And even that, so I agree with you, even that the role are still quite it's not like clearly defined. So I guess how I normally try to, I wouldn't say fix the problem, it's more how to work better, as you mentioned, with the project manager or people around me, is every project I will basically having a bit of time with especially project manager and business analyst and basically anybody working on the team to say, tell me, like, I'm the architect in the team. Tell me what does that mean for you? And then I can calibrate whether I can meet the expectation or not. Because in certain project manager, they might coming from like a software development company background, right? They may say, oh, I expect you to do this and code review. And then if I'm working in like a corporate environment, I say, I understand maybe in your previous role, but my role is really just produce the high level design and you to get approved in the high level design. So you might get the funding for deliver it. So that like a calibration at the beginning to make sure that we understand what this role is in this company for this project. That's how I did it. Because I agree with you. I got probably burned or thrown under the bus because I don't have the same, it's all called the solution architect, but then obviously what the project manager's expectation and what I think I need to do on that project are different. And that means the project didn't end up well because obviously
Yes.
the expectation didn't align. Is there
Oh, yeah.
anything for you to add? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a great technique that you've got. That's such a good. It's and funny how the things that are so obvious are often the things that people don't do. When you don't know something or you're not quite sure how someone feels about a certain thing, just ask them. It's a really simple thing to do, yet many people don't seem to do it. One of the things I really enjoy about consulting, which I've been doing for a while, is it gives me the variety of contracting, but the security of permanent work. And so you're constantly going on to new clients and new projects, and you'll often be doing more than one project or even one client at a time. And so the thing that you get to repeat a lot in that role, which permanent staff wouldn't necessarily get to do, is you get to start somewhere new a lot of the time, and you're always meeting new people, you're always starting to work with new teams. So I guess there's probably stuff there that I'm almost doing subconsciously without necessarily thinking about it. But you're absolutely right. You need to come in and you need to read the room and understand what the context is that you're working in. What's the culture like? What are people's level of experience? What are their expectations? What are the different personalities? How does the organization run? Are they very siloed? And just get a feel for that. And that's a huge part of the role. And there's all sorts of different types of people who work in IT. And there are some developers that you come across, for example, and they just want to be in their own little world. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but they're working with the code and they don't necessarily like dealing with people. The thing about, I think, solution architecture is you have to enjoy working with other people and not be afraid of talking with other people. There's that idea of the servant leader that they have in Scrum circles. And I like to think that the role is that to a good measure, and that to a certain extent, you're like an umbrella sort of protecting the team from stuff coming down from above that might disrupt them, not in like a Scrum Master, but from the architectural sense. And that requires you to be involved in the politics of the organization. It doesn't mean that you have to be Machiavellian or stab people in the back. It just means that you have to be ready to front up and defend your team and hard conversations from time to time. And that can be challenging, but also really rewarding. And so definitely part of the job.
Yeah. So my previous manager always reminds me there's two landscapes in the company. One is the technical landscape, which is pretty straightforward to figure out. If you don't understand, just ask. There's also the other landscape, which is the social landscape. As I mentioned, you can also call that office politics or power structure or how the decisions is being made in the organization. There's something nobody going to tell you, but they exist. Is the major influencer, like that we try to influence in order to get the outcome for any project. I think we're almost at the end. We got 2 minutes in the Zoom recording. Is there any final comment you want to add, Adrian?
Oh, let me have a think. I mean, we're thinking about advice for people wanting to grow into solution architecture. It's all about thinking. I think that critical thinking is such an important part of the role. It worries me with the rise of AI that people tend to be using that as a crutch. I don't know to what extent people will use it in different ways. I'm very mindful of that. For me, it's very much a thought leadership role, and I really value how I think. It's probably really good for helping to brainstorm and give you ideas, but I like to process things myself. So I just don't forget that critical thinking is such a key part of the role. And I think maybe just a reminder to prioritize the soft skills and the technical skills of the job and to not worry about the technology too much. As long as you've had some sort of technical footing, whether you've learned a programming language or you've worked with a certain product stack and you know that really well, those lessons will carry with you, give you that critical technical background. And then it's just really augmenting that with good soft skills and understanding the craft of architecture. And I think that's probably the best advice I can give.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Adrian. For any audience, if you want to become architect, to give us a like and appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ben.